Today I am looking at my Icom 746 Pro, and this radio suffers from a common problem that many 746 and 746 Pro radios suffer from, and that is a inoperative backlight for the display. The radio is still fully usable, but when you turn the radio on, the backlight for the LCD display just doesn't work. And you can still kind of read it, but it's much nicer with the display active. Alright, so my intentions with this video are just to document and kind of show how I go about repairing this radio. I'm not intending to say that this is the only way to do it or the best way to do it, or even really necessarily teach anybody how to do anything here. This is just sort of a documentation of what I'm doing with this radio. Okay, what I've got here up on the computer screen is KA1MDA's 746 backlight repair page, and you can, if you want to visit this page, it is this is the link to it here. And basically I'm going to just follow along what KA1MDA did for the most part to try and repair my radio. Basically he goes through and explains which parts fail and shows the affected area in the schematic and how he went about kind of repairing his radio. And I'm going to do something very similar here. So basically you can kind of follow this website along with my video and get a good idea of how you might want to attack fixing your problem. Okay, the next thing I did was download a decent copy of the service manual for my radio online, and I found a pretty decent version of it at this website, this URL. Some of the manuals that I downloaded before this one seemed to be a little bit illegible when you zoomed up on them, and you want one that's legible, you know, when you zoom in so you can kind of see what the parts are and everything like that. So I've actually downloaded this and I've opened it up in the PDF viewer here, and what I'm going to show first is this right here is the particular circuit board that needs to be removed from the radio that the parts are located on. This is called the S-Logic board, and I believe the parts are located on this side of the board. So in order to get that board out of the radio, I'm going to have to disassemble quite a bit of the radio to get at it. So we'll just kind of go through that and take my time and try and document as much of that as possible. Alright, this is page 9-1 of the service manual, and the affected parts that I'm going to replace are this transistor Q302 and these two capacitors here, C303 and C302. If you read KA1MDA's page, his kind of theory about why the radio fails is that these capacitors dry out and change value and cause excessive current to flow through this transistor. So in addition to replacing these parts, I'm going to make a heatsink just like he did to mount to the top of this transistor and sort of try and sink some of the heat away from that heat. Okay, this is page 6-1 of the service manual, and this is part of the parts list. This is for the S-Logic board, and I'm looking at the Q302 line here, and you can see that the transistor is a 2SB1201-S-TL. Okay, and again on page 6-1 you can see the listing for C302 and 303. These are actually Panasonic surface mount capacitors. And this particular series, the EC-EV, is no longer available from Mauser. But what I ended up doing was I found a substitute for this part, which, for all intents and purposes, seems to be the same thing. Alright, so here are the parts that I've ordered for the Icom, and you can see here from this copy of the invoice that the capacitor part number that I'm using is the EEE series instead of the EC-EV series. This seems to be a direct fit, form, and function replacement. I did try to compare the data sheets and check the sizes of everything and the lead spacing, and it all seems to be the same thing. I think the only difference between these and the original capacitors is that they're now RoHS compliant, so everything should be okay there. And then of course there's the transistor that I ordered from Mouser right there. And you'll notice I've ordered 2 of each one. As you can see, they're very inexpensive. I just figured it would be good to have 2 in case I screwed one up to some degree or something like that. And there they are in their packages, ready to go in. Okay, so I guess now that we've got all that stuff out of the way, it's time to start disassembly of the radio. And I'm just going to start with the obvious things. Remove the case screws from the outside, maybe the handle. I'm not sure if that needs to come off or not, but we'll find kind of all these case screws, get those off, and then see what we find inside. And I always like to have something here to put all the screws into so I don't lose them. And depending on how complicated this gets, I may grab a couple of these things and label them so that I know everything goes back together the way that it came apart. So I'll go ahead and take these screws off here and come back when I've got something more significant. Okay, so I've got the case off, and you can see here the next thing that I want to try and do is remove the front panel, and I think that's going to be achieved probably by removing some or all of the knobs here. And there's a couple of screws here, and presumably 2 on the other side, and a whole slew of wires and ribbon cables and things of that nature. Alright, so I've taken the knobs off, and it looks like under here, under the main tuning knob, there's some sort of metal bracket here and a screw that will need to come off. So I'm going to try and do that next. Okay, so as it turns out, there's not just this screw here, but there is a little screw here that is also connected to this. As you can see, it's kind of moving there. So I think once I take that out, this whole assembly will come out of the radio. Okay, so I had started to remove the ring on the microphone connector here, but as it turns out, that's really not necessary. The front panel bezel will just come off. There's 4 of these tabs that slip over a metal piece on the front panel, but it looks like the next thing that needs to happen is the whole front panel needs to come off. So I've removed the 4 screws. There's 2 on this side and 2 on the other, and now I think it's time to start just slowly divorcing these flex ribbon cables from the circuit board. And it's important to go slow with these things because you can damage the fingers on these flex boards pretty easily. Okay, that was easier than I thought. After looking at this a little closer, it was just this one that was holding the front panel on, in addition to the 4 screws. So now I'm going to set the rest of the radio aside, and we'll concentrate just on removing the front. Okay, now I believe the plastic bezel will just come off by just slightly prying up these plastic tabs here, 2 on each side, and this should just come out of here. And I think, well, no, I think there's a ribbon cable in there. There is one more ribbon cable attached to a board that is behind these buttons here. So, okay, so what I did is I pulled this one out first just so I could get some access to this inner ribbon cable here, which I've removed, and I believe that all will now kind of slide out of there. Just kind of check that, and something else is holding it here. Feels like, yep, there's another one up here, and that is this one right here. So I'm going to remove this as well. Okay, so I was able to get that apart. You can see here's the front panel, and again I'm going to set this aside. Okay, so the next step, I believe, is I'm going to remove some of these wires and flex ribbons here, some on the sides, and then there's a few screws on this board to remove. Okay, so I've released all the wires and ribbon cables, and I've removed all the screws, and the screws are numbered for some reason, and I just opted to take them out in the order that they're numbered here. I don't know if that's really necessary, but I did it anyway. And what I've found out is that the two knobs here are also attached to that board. So these nuts on this side will need to be released in order for that board to come out. Okay, and here is the board removed from the rest of the front panel, and I've put the front panel aside. So this is the back side of the board, and this is the top side. And so now I believe we're going to need to pull the cover off this shield and see what things look like. Okay, and here is the board removed from the rest of the front panel, and I've put the front panel aside. So this is the back side of the board, and this is the top side. And so now I believe we're going to need to pull the cover off this shield and see what things look like. Okay, so here is the area with the cover removed, and you can see here's the transistor that should be bad, and the two capacitors that I'm going to replace, and some other circuitry and components in there. So I guess the next thing to do is maybe just for ease of trying to get at everything, probably remove this shield off of the board, and that'll make removing these parts a little bit easier. Okay, to remove the shield here, I'm going to use my desoldering tool. I'm going to let that heat up for a few minutes, and I should be able to desolder. Let's see, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots to desolder, and then this should pull out. Okay, you can see here that I've managed to remove the shield from the board, and I'll clean these pads up here in a bit, but I was able to use my desoldering tool here, and I need a little extra help from my solder station as well. I just used the iron. I didn't use the hot air. I didn't want to risk blowing any of these small components off the board here. So so now I guess we'll take a look at desoldering some things. Okay, so I'm looking at the components here that I need to remove, which are the transistor and the two capacitors here. But before I start putting any heat to the board and getting the soldering iron in here at all, what I'm going to try and do is cover these smaller components here with some Kapton tape, this stuff here, this brown stuff. And what this does, this will help kind of insulate these components from excess heat, and it'll also prevent me from bumping them with the soldering iron and possibly flicking them off the board somewhere where I can't find them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then get ready to try and remove these things. Okay, so I've got a couple pieces of Kapton tape on here, you can see now, and actually it's covering the lead on one of these capacitors here, so I'll have to readjust it afterwards. But what I'll try and do is remove this one, and then readjust everything, and this one should be easier to remove. Okay, I don't really have a good way to hold the camera and show while I'm doing this, but I'm just going to try and hit this thing with a little heat as briefly as possible. Okay, so you can see here that I've removed the transistor, and you can probably hear it in the background. I used my hot air gun to do that, and I ended up melting the bottom of this other capacitor a little bit with the heat gun. You know, seeing as that I'm replacing it, I guess that's okay, but at any rate, both of those are off now, and now I'll just kind of move this Kapton tape around and try and get at this one but I think this time I'll probably try to use the soldering iron instead of the heat gun. Okay, so I've managed to get all the components off, but in so doing, on the last capacitor that I was removing, inevitably I ended up ripping the pad off the board here. So I'm going to have to try and think of a solution for this, or try and repair the board somehow. Okay, so here you can see that I've taken a wire and soldered it in place of the trace. I scraped off a little bit of solder mask on this side of the trace and a little on this side and joined it with this wire. And what I'll do now is when I solder the new capacitor on, one leg of course will go to this pad where it should go, and the other leg will go onto this wire. It's slightly less than ideal, but it ought to work for this application. So now before I put the capacitor on, I'm just going to check and make sure I haven't shorted anything and that this is fully connected properly between here and here. Okay, so you can see here I've got the capacitor soldered in. It's maybe not the prettiest thing in the world, but I've got it attached to the pad on that side, and I don't know how well this thing's going to focus, but it's attached to my makeshift trace on this side. Alright, so I'm going to just briefly show here what I'm doing to, I'm going to prep my transistor. So I've got it with the leads up, or the bottom of it up, and I'm just going to use my flux pen and put a little flux on the two legs and on the bottom pad here. And then I'm going to take my soldering iron, which I've already pre-tinned the tip, and I'm just going to hit these leads and let a little bit of solder flow onto them just from the tip of the iron. Now the pad here I might have to draw a little on. Okay, so there, that will sort of prep the component. And then what I'm going to do is flux the board, put a little flux on the board here, and get that ready. Then I will place the transistor over the pads and center it as best I can. Here I'll use the tweezers to kind of place it, and then I'm going to use the tweezers to hold it if I can here. And maybe the better thing to do would be to use these pliers just to put a little weight on it to keep it from moving. I just want to center it a little better if I can. And now I should be able to just kiss this thing with the soldering iron and get the leads to flow. And I might need to put a little pressure on it there. Okay. And those should be good. I'll, just before I move on, I'm going to use my eye loop and do a Okay, and now what I'm going to try and do is put some pressure on that component, or on the component body, and put a little heat to the pad here, and this might take a couple seconds to get some heat into it and get that to flow. Now I might need to add a little more solder to that. And I think what I'm going to try and do is add it to the iron and let it wick into the component. There we go. That took it. Okay, and that should be good. Just want to hit this lead over here one more time. It looks a little off balance. And that should be good. Maybe not quite as good as a professional would do, but should be good enough for this application. Alright, so I've got a few minutes here, and I'm going to try and cut a piece off of this heatsink to use in the Icom. And you can see I've marked this here in from the edge. I'm cutting this about 350 thousandths. I'm going to cut here, and then eventually I'm going to cut this flush with the bottom of these fins, but for now I'll just do a rough cut somewhere in the middle. And even if I screw this up, I've got plenty of material to work with, so that's probably good. And to cut the thing, what I'm going to use just is this Dremel tool with the cutoff wheel, and this being aluminum, I would think it should cut pretty smoothly, so I'll give it a try. Okay, so here's the piece that I've cut, and you can see I've still got the tab left, so I'm going to try and cut the rest of that off and then smooth the bottom out. And then, of course, this is the face that I cut, and it's a little rough, so I'll just take that out to the grinding wheel outside and give it a short grind just to kind of clean that up and smooth it out. And you can see I nicked this a couple times with the wheel, but outside of that, I think it's fine. You know, this would have come out a little cleaner if I had access to a bandsaw, but I don't, so the Dremel tool seemed like it'll work just fine. Okay, so I've got my heatsink created here. You can see I've kind of cleaned it up and deburred it and all that sort of thing. And you'll also notice here that I've cut off a couple of the fins, and the reason for that was just sort of a fitment issue. I'll show it here without the shield on first. This is going to sit down over this transistor, kind of like this, and the two fins that were on the bottom here were just sort of bumping into this capacitor and causing a little bit of a tight fit. So I just cut them off, and you'll see here with the shield in place, everything just drops in pretty nice and fits pretty well here. So you can see I've started to make some marks here on the shield for where to drill my hole, and that will be the next operation. Okay, one more thing that I want to do here before I reattach the shield in the heatsink and get that all enclosed is I'm going to take a little bit of my wife's nail polish here and just kind of coat that exposed section of trace and wire that I kind of cobbed in there to fix that lifted pad that I had, and that'll just kind of ensure that nothing oxidizes over time or has any problems. And you know, this probably isn't the best material to use, but it's what I have on hand, and it should work fine. Okay, so I've got the heatsink mounted to the shield here. You can see with the screw in the side, drilled the hole, got that mounted, and now I'll just drop this on here like that and just see how everything fits. Everything seems to fit good. No interference or anything like that. In fact, maybe this could be lowered a little bit. I'm not sure if it's in complete contact with the top of the transistor, but it should be good enough, since I am going to use some heatsink compound on there. And I'm rifling through my drawer. Oh, there it is. And so what I'll do is I'll put a little of this stuff on top of the transistor and under the heatsink, and that'll help fill any voids and transfer any heat off to the heatsink. Of course, at this point, any type of heatsink is going to be better than none. So, alright, there you have it. Everything is soldered back in place with a little bit of that thermal grease underneath the heatsink. And there's everything kind of all soldered back in and cleaned up for the most part. And I guess I should probably put this shield cover on. Okay, so I've got the board kind of dry fit back in the front panel housing area where it belongs. And I don't know how visible it is with the camera there, but you can see that the edge of the shield where I mounted the screw, and it's not, and the camera probably really isn't showing in here, but it's not really touching the board that's right to the left of it there, but it's close. And I suppose if things are torqued down, it could come in contact with that other board that's just over here to the left, and short out against the vias and stuff that are in that board. So what I'm going to do, I think, rather than grind down the screw head, since there is some clearance there, I'm just going to put a few pieces of Kapton tape over the screw and the side of the shield, and maybe I'll even put one on the board for good measure if I can get in there. So I think that's all I'll do. I won't grind the screw down like KA1MD. Okay, so here's just a quick shot showing the Kapton tape over the screw there, and you can see I put some on the board there too, just for good measure. Okay, so I've got this part back together, got the board on, there's the 5 screws, and again these are numbered on the silk screen. Not sure why, if they did that for torque reasons or not, but I did put them in and torque them down in sequence. And then all these ZIF cables I've put back in. They're different places. I've left these out for now. And then I also put the nuts and washers back on here. Next step is to, I believe, marry up my front panel with this. And of course there's these couple of ZIF cables that need to fish their way in here and connect to the rear of this board again. So once that's all back on, then I can seat these as well. Okay, so I think I've got the bezel back on. I've got all the ZIF wires reconnected. This one here was one that had to fish through from the front panel, and of course the one that's kind of buried in there as well fished through from the front. And then there's no screws holding this on, it's all just these clips right here, so this sort of snapped into place. And now I'll reattach this to the front of the radio. There's just this one ZIF connector to reinsert, and then I think there's just the 4 screws. They had the countersink heads on them, although the metal isn't countersunk here. I don't know if that was an oversight or what was going on, but that'll be the next. Okay, so I've got the front panel on. It was just the 4 screws there, and then the next thing that I'm going to do is put this support bracket on for the tuning knob before I go any further. And I'm just going to remove this screw that I had put back in here and saved, and this just slides in like that. There's this long screw that goes in the hole inside the tuning knob bezel, and then this is going to come out, and you're going to want to pull out on that and then line up this screw into the hole there. And I'm just going to get that started if I can. And this just requires a little dexterity. Okay, and maybe I'm a little slow here, but I just kind of figured out the whole point of this tuning knob thing. So loosening this up a bit, or tightening it makes the spin of the tuning knob tighter, and loosening it frees it up so you can kind of do that. So I guess that's an adjustment that you can make for your own personal preference right there. Okay, so I think the next thing I'm going to do is try and put the case on. So I've got the bottom case here, and I'm just going to pick up the rest of the chassis of the radio. I'll take one last look in there and make sure everything looks okay. I think it does. Nothing loose, nothing out of place, so I'll drop this into the chassis like this, I think. Line that up properly. There. Okay, then I'll get the holes lined up roughly, and then drop the top part on. And then now it's just a matter of putting all the screws back on. Okay, so the moment of truth here. I've got the case all back together. I've got the power supply on. You can see I haven't put the knobs on yet. I'm gonna clean these up a little bit before I put them on. Didn't want to wait any longer, so go ahead and give this thing its initial boot up here and see what happens. So there's power supply, and now I'll fire up the radio and see if any smoke comes out. Okay, no smoke, but no sound. There it is, just a squelch. Okay, so there you have it. Display seems to be working, and everything else at the moment seems to be functioning. Alright, so I'm just going to, I got the squelch turned up here again. I'm just going to set the brightness, and to do that, just hold the menu setting in, and you can see here it is, well, there's contrast and brightness, I guess. Let's see what the contrast does. Oh boy, we don't want that high. I don't know, about 50% seems pretty good for the contrast, and the brightness, I've got that at 100%. I like to run it at 100% anyway, but I think for putting less stress on that transistor that I just replaced, I think it's best to leave it at 100% anyway, based on what I've read. So, not that it should be a problem with the heatsink on it anymore anyway, but anyway, it looks like everything is good to go. So I'm just going to clean up the knobs, put those back on, and put the radio on the air here, and